today we are on chapter 14. And for anyone who is joining us for the first time, I think this may be somewhat easy to listen to, this particular talk on chapter 14, because I'm going to have to fill in a lot of what happened previously in the Lotus Sutra. But this is really a critical chapter. It's where the Buddha is giving the 4 sukha viharas, the 4 beneficial practices of, it's an le xing in Chinese, of peaceful, happy practices in order to fulfill the bodhisattva vow. So it's a really critical chapter, very, very, very important. So what I first want to do is I want to make a few general remarks about understanding the Lotus Sutra and how to approach it. And these come from David Chappell, who's a professor at the University of Hawaii. So one thing that's important in all Dharma talks, all Dharma understanding, is to be aware of our desire to reduce the whole world to what we understand. And the world generally is much wider than our limited understandings. And so in following this the sutra and the bodhisattva vows, we want to generate a mind of bodhi and compassion. So the Dharmic truth is organic and relational. And one thing about the Lotus Sutra, which I think it's a very, very helpful way to look at it, is it defines the truth as what is helpful for growth, what is helpful for us to grow and flourish in the Dharma. And also keep in mind that the Lotus Sutra is going to break all of our conceptions, or it has that potential, because we often know about the understanding of phenomenal things as conditioned and impermanent as being the ultimate view. But that ultimately is as groundless as the illusion of something being permanent and independent. And like it says in the Dharma Dharmata, permanence and impermanence are really 2 extremes. So that's my kind of opening way of getting us into the mindset of studying the sutra. So anyone who listened to my last talk on chapter 13 knows that towards the end of the chapters, the bodhisattvas who were at the 8th bhumi, non-backsliding, made a vow to copy, keep, recite, uphold the sutra, and to spread it broadly. That was their vow. And now we're in chapter 14, where that is going to be the center of the sutra, because and of this chapter. It begins with Manjushri being asked about how these bodhisattvas should preach the Dharma. And this chapter represents the last chapter of the trace teachings, according to traditional understandings of how the whole sutra is structured. And the trace teachings are looking at Shakyamuni Buddha as a historical figure who lived and taught in this world, while the next 14 chapters constitute the origin teaching, which represent how Shakyamuni is the primordial Buddha, awakened since the inconceivably remote past. I take some exception to that because anyone who remembers chapter 11 with the stupa rising in the air and Shakyamuni sharing a seat with Prabhuta Ratna, that doesn't seem to me like very much of a historical figure, but I just want to give you the context. So this chapter is really the end of these, the first set of teachings. And so the chapter begins with Manjushri saying that the bodhisattvas will be undertaking something very difficult, or translated, it's very rare to have some to have such bodhisattvas. It's Shenwei Nanyo in Chinese. So I've consulted many different translations as well as the Chinese. It's very interesting to see how people interpret even the characters at a base level as one thing or another. So these bodhisattvas have made a great vow to spread the Lotus Sutra in particular. And as I said last time, I want to be very clear on what it means to spread the Lotus Sutra. It's not like some scholars think, so self-promoting, even though it talks about itself, if you will, quite frequently about the Lotus Sutra, and it's important to read this and spread the gathas of the Lotus Sutra and to hold it above all of the sutras. As I mentioned in my last talk, what's really important in understanding this is the essential principle, the thing that you can come to know, but you can't perceive with your 5 or 6 senses until you study the sutra very deeply. That is really, I believe, what the Lotus Sutra is trying to proclaim. It's also trying to proclaim itself in a more relative way. That can't be denied. And one thing that we'll talk about is the antecedents of the Lotus Sutra. In other words, when it began to be compiled, we know very little about what groups of people wrote it. Some people think the Buddha himself proclaimed the sutra. I have no problem with that. Scholars differ because it seems to have been compiled by the 1st or 2nd century CE, and the first translation in Chinese is 286 CE. But we don't know how far back the events, if you will, took place. Could be early centuries BC, and I think BCE, and I think that's something to keep in mind when we try to understand perhaps how the sutra was understood in its time and the early centuries of Buddhism. And of course, we're really responding to it now in the 21st century. So the Manjushri is explaining these, the Buddha is explaining to Manjushri these 4 great practices. And what they are practices of the body, practices of speech, practices of mind, and practices of vows. And there is one parable at the end of the sutra, which I will go into, and depending on time, I will try to do a recap of the other parables so I can show how this one compares. But so let's launch into what these practices are. And for anyone who tries to read this chapter 14, and you try to see where the divisions are between the 4 practices, it's not all that easy. The sutra sort of says when one begins and one doesn't, but there are some kind of misleading cues in it. But having consulted many sources, I'm pretty clear on how these are defined. I'm just giving this as a heads up for anyone who'd like to read the chapter in the sutra afterwards, which of course I greatly recommend. So the first sutra, the first of the practices, the first of the sukha viharas is the body. And now there are the practices and associations. Now the practices that the Buddha is talking about are qualities of comportment, qualities of the way that you are in the world, so that you are patient, you're gentle, you're agreeable, you're not given to violent starts, you're not greatly alarmed by change or what people say or do, and you're not attached, really not attached to anything in the conventional sense, and you observe phenomena as they are, making no distinctions. Now remember, the Buddha is talking to very advanced bodhisattvas. Not all of us quite fall into this category. But once again, these are things that we can aspire to. So it's very important to make note of how we can understand the way that we ought to be when we're approaching the Dharma and we're approaching the teaching of it. Now then, the next part of this section on the body has to do with associations and who we approach when we're teaching the Dharma. And so the first thing has to do with who we keep away from. And I really have to give some context for this, because here we are in the 21st century, and we feel that we like things to be so we really feel that we like to spread our compassion, our understanding to everyone. We don't want to discriminate at all. But remember, as I said, we're now in the early centuries of Buddhism, and certainly in the early centuries of the development of the Mahayana. So there were very, very important things that a bodhisattva, a monk, had to keep in mind, so that when they taught, they were teaching in a very pure way, and they weren't subject to influence. And they also weren't giving the wrong impression to people. So please understand that as I go through some of these things. And I think they're very interesting. So you keep away from people who are rulers, princes, high ministers, politicians, and disreputable people. And not to associate with people from other religious traditions or secularists, people who are really promoting worldly literature, and materialists, and of course hunters and butchers. And later on it says that, of course, if these people approach you as a teacher, well, that's fine, but it's a question of picking your associations so that you cannot be decried or criticized by anyone. Also, you avoid associating with the opposite sex in ways that could be construed by some as implying intimacy. So you don't enter a house alone. You take another monk with you. Of course, this is speaking about monks in the early years, not so much nuns. And if you have to go into a house alone, it says to single-mindedly keep the Buddha in mind. And when, if you are consulting with women, try not to laugh raucously, expose your chest, some interesting things it says, and not even for the sake of the Dharma. And also not delight in keeping disciples. So, in today's world, there are so many scandals, often in sanghas, and there are people who try to bring to bear undue influence with younger people. So even though this is at least 2,000 years ago that we're talking about, the Buddha is aware of all of these relationships we have, and really trying to give us a clear picture. The people that he's talking to really are high-level bodhisattvas who are going out to spread the teachings. But there's something I believe we can learn from it too. But he says we only delight in meditation, and we sit in a quiet place, we practice to control our minds. Just a little footnote about how difficult it must have been in the early years for the Sangha to establish itself and to keep working consistently and attract people. So according to the Vinaya, the monastic code, they didn't want anyone joining the Sangha as an escape. So they barred men who didn't have their wives' position, fathers who didn't have the permission of their adult children, debtors reneging on their debts, deserters from military service, fugitives from justice, persons in arrears in taxes, novices who did not have the permission of both parents, and a variety of various heterodox sexual pursuits. All of those things were in the Vinaya. Next, it said also still in the realm of the body, how we are in the world, who we're associating with. We want to keep away from arrogant people, stubborn adherents to the lesser vehicle. Remember, this is in the early years of Mahayana, and there must have been real tension in some ways between Mahayana and what we now call mainstream Buddhism. Some reports that monks of various different persuasions got along well, but once again, we're very unclear about what happened in these early years. So also, to be avoided, monks who violate precepts, nuns who laugh and jest. I'm just reading from the sutra. Lay women profoundly attached to the 5 desires, or ones who seek immediate entry into extinction. And I think by that it means if you meet somebody who wants to become enlightened immediately, whatever that happens to mean, people have all sorts of unreal expectations, or they can have when they start practicing the Dharma. But the sutra says if they come with good hearts, then you teach them with no expectations. And you don't go into talking about doctrines as being superior, middling, or inferior. I think this is a really important thing to note, because remember how the sutra is continually saying it is the supreme among sutras. But here, in a practical application, when you're actually working with people and trying to teach them the Dharma, you don't go there. You're not making those kind of distinctions. And you're not talking about what's conditioned or unconditioned. In other words, what's real and relative and absolute, real or not real. And even it says you don't make distinctions saying this is a man, this is a woman. And I think this is also really important in what we discussed in earlier chapters, especially the Devadatta chapter in chapter 12, where the Naga princess instantly became a Buddha, and in the last chapter where Mahaprajapati and Yasodhara, the Buddha's aunt who raised him, and his wife, how they got proclamations of Buddhahood. And another thing I might as well mention here, many times in this chapter, the Buddha talks about the Fourfold Assembly, and that is monks, nuns, lay men, and lay women. And this was very important in the Buddha's teaching, to really not make distinctions. And even though it might sound in the beginning, what I was talking about avoiding various people and various attitudes, the ultimate aim of the teachings are to be all-inclusive. And so one translation I used of Burton Watson said, do not try to apprehend phenomena, understand, or see them. Another translation of that is one should not see or grasp things or to know them. You take up a quiet practice in teachings, and if you do so, bodhisattvas will have tranquil minds and will not be timid or weak. So that concludes the first section of the first Sukha Vihara. Right, so the first one is divided into 2 parts. The first one is about associations and how you present yourself. The second, more profound, and once again could be many Dharma talks in and of itself, is about perceiving the emptiness of all Dharmas in their true aspect. So I'll read this part from the sutra and discuss it a little bit. So bodhisattvas, anyone studying the sutra, understands that dharmas have no characteristics and they only arise through dependent origination. Meaning we are seeing the world in the way we see it when we think everything is real and we think our desires and our thoughts are really real. We're seeing things in the way that we see them because we don't recognize that everything is contingent and nothing arises in and of itself and nothing is permanent. So that's what that is aiming at. And it says, furthermore, the bodhisattva mahasattvas perceive the emptiness of all dharmas in their true aspects. All things are unerring, unmoving, non-returning, irreversible, and like empty space which lacks substance. They are beyond all language. They are not produced, nor do they emerge, nor do they arise. They do not have any name or mark, and in reality, they have no substance. I remember when I was in graduate school, and I was reading, actually it was Master Sheng Yen. He had a line about the true nature of all dharmas is that they have no characteristics. And I read that and I fell off the chair because I just couldn't conceive of what that meant. So this is really talking about the true nature of the way the world is, and it's not discounting the relative, form is equal to emptiness. Emptiness is also equal to form. And another great thing from the Song of Enlightenment is that being aware of the arising mind is the non-arising mind. So this great absolute, truly our Buddha nature, is really with us all the time, but as this paragraph is getting to, we don't necessarily notice it. But this particular paragraph is aimed at the bodhisattvas to ascertain and to really fix and affirm an understanding of emptiness. So once again, these dharmas are immeasurable, limitless, without obstacles or obstructions. And as I said, they only exist through dependent origination arising through error. Right? That error is the way that we cling to the world, and we see things not as the world is, but as we would like the world to be, or as the way we would like the world not to be. That is the error. That is what creates suffering. So the Buddha says, that is why I teach the permanent joy of perceiving the aspects of all existent things in this way. This is what is known as the second sphere of relationships of a bodhisattva mahasattva. And John Cleary, I used a number of translations. He translated one of these lines, which in Chinese is Yiqie Yuyan Da Duan. The road of using language as a substitute for reality is cut off. Now, the Chinese doesn't actually say that, but I really love that line. The road of using language as a substitute for reality is cut off. So sometimes taking liberties with translations is can be helpful for our understanding. So there is the first Sukha Vihara on our practice, how we maintain a quiet, respectful demeanor, not ruffled by things, and filled with compassion, and also we are not associating with the wrong type of people in the wrong way, but we are associating with everyone who wishes to listen to the teaching, and also how we have a very deep understanding of emptiness and all that implies of impermanence of not self, of anatta, of continual flow of existence, and how we can understand that and not be attached to these erroneous things that arise in our mind. So now we're going to the second Sukha Vihara, which is speech. So, and once again, everything is abiding in peaceful practices. An le Xing, that is the name of the chapter. Everything is about that. And when we abide in these peaceful practices, we're living an uncomplicated, useful and helpful life to ourselves and everyone else. So first thing, in speaking, we don't delight in speaking in others' faults or faults of the scriptures. Not clear whether it's of the Lotus Sutra or just of other scriptures. And you show no contempt for other Dharma teachers or for their tastes or shortcomings. And with voice hearers, Shravakas, people from what we now call mainstream Buddhism, you don't refer to them by name. You don't praise or blame them. You don't become resentful. And you have a peaceful mind, and listeners will respond. When you're presented with difficult questions, don't use the Dharma of the lesser vehicle, only use the Mahayana. So all of the people who listen to you can acquire all-embracing wisdom. As many of you know, the sutra is divided into prose and verse sections. Some of the prose and verse sections are almost identical, but in many cases the verse supplies things that were that sort of enhance and weren't really given in the prose. And of course, historically, historians believe that the verse came first, but right now, the way the sutra is presented, the prose comes first. So now in this verse section, on the second Brahma Vihara, which we're on, the Brahma Vihara of speech, it talks about how the Dharma teacher presents himself in a clean robe, his body anointed with oil, inwardly and outwardly pure, using expedient means, parables, to cause the listeners to aspire to enlightenment and enter the Buddha way. And this, of course, is very important. As I've said earlier in the sutra, the sutra begins with the teaching of the one vehicle, which this is a way of espousing it, this whole sutra, to other people, and also expedient means. The idea that the Buddha's knowledge could not be imparted the way he understood it. We can only get it in dribs and drabs. Which reminds me, there's an early sutra in Pali Canon where the Buddha is with his monks, and he's in a forest of sala trees, I believe, and he picks up one leaf, and he says to the monks, which is greater, the leaf in my hand or the leaves in all of the trees in the forest? This was not very difficult to answer. So the Buddha said, just so. What I have taught you, and he's talking about the mainstream Buddha, the early teachings, what I have taught you is represented by this leaf. What I actually know is represented by the entire forest, and I would say all the forests in the world, perhaps in the universe. So the Lotus Sutra is giving us the entire forest. So we have to be somewhat gentle with ourselves in approaching this and understand that there's really a lot of depth and a lot of detail. But it is approachable, and it's quite wonderful as we start to teach it. So in using these expedient means and parables to cause the listeners to aspire to enlightenment and enter the Buddha way, the Bodhisattva should not be lazy, day and night expounding the teaching, and also have no worries about food and drink and medicine, not to be expecting any kind of recompense for his or her efforts. So to single-mindedly bring peace to his listeners. And further, he says, after I have passed away, and this is another important theme throughout the sutra and in this chapter, Manjarishi was asking the Buddha about ages to come, and these were ashur, evil ages to come after the Buddha passed away. I know many of us feel that this speaks to us right now in 2021, and this was very much on everyone's mind about times when people would not be talking to each other in greater and lesser ways, which is sort of where we are now. So this is very much in the sutra on the Buddha's mind. So after I have passed away, and we will see what that really means come in the next chapters, but right now the Buddha is talking in conventional terms, even conventional terms in mainstream Buddha, because the Pali Canon makes it very clear that for approximately 80 years the Buddha taught in the world, and then he passed into parinirvana. He died, passed away. That is the conventional understanding, and the Buddha is using that, is addressing us with that understanding. So he says if the bodhisattvas are really upholding, teaching, reciting, copying the sutra, they will not be troubled or reviled, fearful, attacked by sword or staff, or banished, because they abide in patience. They will be peaceful and happy, and they will get uncountable blessings. This is very interesting to compare with what was spoken about in the last chapter, because the bodhisattvas there, they're not complaining, but they're telling it like it is, that their message will not be received very patiently by the people who hear it. They expect real pushback, people reviling the sutra, and that they will encounter all sorts of setbacks. Here the Buddha is saying something quite different. He's saying that they won't be troubled or reviled, and they won't be attacked by sword or staff, which is something they said earlier. So I think that you can approach an understanding of this as not so much a contradiction as an understanding that the Buddha is now talking about the inner being, the being that is at one with Buddha nature, the being that is patient. So that way, what might seem to be difficulties and attacks and who knows what, in a more conventional sense, for us ordinary sentient beings, would not be experienced in the same way by people who have attained a certain level in their practice. Okay, so that is the end of Sukha Vihara number 2. That is the Sukha Vihara on speech. Once again, giving all of the different ways that speech should be used only to promote the sutra, not to push people away. And the Buddha says that someone who speaks in the proper way and is dedicated to the proclamation and teaching and spreading of the sutra will have uncountable blessings. So now we go to Sukha Vihara number 3, the mind. So here the Buddha says the practitioner, the bodhisattvas, remember that's the group he's talking to, their minds must not be jealous, fawning, or deceitful, contemptuous, or seek out shortcomings in other people. And, you could see how a lesser person might be given to all of these kind of mental weaknesses. They could be jealous of people who are more articulate, more knowledgeable. They could be fawning in terms of deferring to somebody who's teaching and they're really not divulging that they don't know certain things, and instead of actually asking, they just fawn, or just are obsequious and toady-like, as we might say, and also deceitful. People often portray themselves as knowing more than they actually do, and by the same token, you could be contemptuous of other people. They don't really know the sutra the way I know it, or really trying to look at their shortcomings, and rather than trying to help people, sometimes finding someone else's shortcomings can be very helpful if you share it with them in the right way and they're open to it. But here the Buddha is really talking about mind states and how we should have purified mind states, not given to negativity. And furthermore, this is quite interesting, the Buddha is saying, don't discourage even those who seek to be voice hearers, right, the Shravakas or mainstream Buddhist practitioners, or Prateka Buddhas, or seek the Bodhisattva way. Don't say it's hopeless for you. And one thing I found sort of interesting in studying the Lotus Sutra is it does say that there is the one vehicle, right? And the three vehicles would be, the Shravakas, the voice hearers, the Prateka Buddhas, and the Bodhisattvas. And I thought at first, well, what's wrong with the Bodhisattvas? Bodhisattvas are practicing for everyone else, putting everyone else in front of them, and taking special vows. I'm even vowing to be Buddhas. But what I think the Buddha is getting to here is by proclaiming the one vehicle. The Buddha is proclaiming, and once again he has to use words, he's proclaiming mind itself. And mind itself has no attachments, it has no descriptions. It is within and beyond everything. So it will be found in all of the three teachings, but it also will not be confined to the three teachings. So it is this miraculous teaching of the Lotus Sutra, and that's why the Buddha can say that, yes, you can support everyone in the way that they are understanding practice at the level where they are. And that is reinforced many times, especially in chapter 2, the expedient means chapter, where the Buddha explains that he is very well attuned to where people are. And chapter 5, with the raining of the Dharma on all of the plants, it's all the same Dharma, but it is received differently, as if water is received differently by different plants, and different plants grow at different rates. So the Buddha here in Sukha Vihara number 3, the mind, is really getting the Bodhisattva to have a very non-attached mind and to deal with everyone as they are. So you don't say that it's hopeless, you'll never reach Buddhahood, you will not get enlightened. That's never said. Also, no frivolous debate, showing great compassion to everyone, looking at the Tathagatas as kindly fathers, as bodhisattvas, as great teachers, and to respect and revere the bodhisattvas of the 10 directions. If bodhisattvas practice this third set, in other words, the Sukha Vihara of the mind, then they will be free from anxiety and confusion, and they'll find good students, and get them to listen to and assent to and embrace, recite, preach, copy the sutra, cause others to copy it, and present offerings to the sutra rolls, and treat the sutra with reverence and respect. And then the sutra has a verse section which really recapitulates what I've just said. Once again, the sukha vihara of the mind, getting the bodhisattva to have a mind that is clear and filled with compassion. Only interest is in the students, wherever they are and however they are. Because remember, earlier in the sutra, the Buddha said, I came to the world to save sentient beings, and I want everyone to be like me. Very important. So now we are going to Sukha Vihara number 4. This is the practice of vows. And this is really where the sutra sort of ignites, and the power of the sutra is really becoming more visible, right? Because now it's one thing to have a mindset, it's one thing to worry about body, speech, and mind, but it's another to really make a vow and then to do everything to fulfill it. So the Buddha says, among bodhisattvas and mahasattvas, whether they're still at home or left home, and he says, when the Dharma is about, his teaching, when the Dharma is about to perish, and he says, accept and those who accept and embrace the Lotus Sutra, they will cultivate a mind of great compassion towards those who are not bodhisattvas. And they will see that those people have made a great error. Because these people, they don't listen, they don't know, they don't make inquiries, they don't believe, and they don't understand. So this is a real fundamental trigger for a bodhisattva. It's really looking at the world. Sometimes the word pity is used, or compassion, sympathizing with, seeing people. A metaphor would almost be like seeing someone who's dying of thirst, who's got a house that's right next to a river. Somehow they just don't see it. This is the bodhisattva's understanding. The teaching is so close and so accessible, but for various reasons, which we may get into, people just don't understand it. So now the vow is when I have attained Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi with transcendental powers and great wisdom. Burton Watson says, I will employ my transcendental powers and the power of wisdom to draw them, those are sentient beings, to me, and cause them to abide in the law. Jean Reed says, wherever I am, using divine powers and the powers of wisdom, I will lead them to take this Dharma into their lives. And John Cleary says, but when we gain ultimate, complete enlightenment, we must use our spiritual powers and the powers of wisdom to influence them wherever they are and enable them to get the opportunity to dwell in the teaching. And there's some very, in the Chinese, it's Zhiwei Li Yinzhi. So there's like this character Yin to lead, and then there's Ling de Jusha Fa Zheng. These two characters, Yin and Ling, which can mean lead or to cause. Interesting, I'm just bringing this up. I don't think I'm going to go into great detail, but just how the Buddha actually affects the world. He's not, obviously he's not forcing anyone. He's not pushing people, but he's guiding, and there is a causal relationship. The teachings are in the world. They are discoverable. So they in themselves are a cause for enlightenment. And I think it's interesting to see how the vow works there. And so let's just move on. So that was the first real reason, the real trigger, as I'm saying, for the vow, to see how people really have lost an opportunity, people who are not studying the Dharma. So he says, the Buddha says, the bodhisattvas and mahasattvas who succeed in carrying out the rules will make no errors. And they will be supported, respected, honored, and acclaimed by monks and nuns, by laymen and lay women, by kings and princes and courtiers, by the common people and by the priests. The celestial beings of the air who hear them teaching will also follow them and serve them, whether they are in villages or in cities or in the wilderness. People will come to ask them questions. Celestial beings will protect them day and night for the sake of the teachings. These bodhisattvas will be able to bring joy to all who listen to them. Why? Because this sutra is protected by the spiritual powers of all the enlightened ones of the past, present, and future. Manjushri, in countless lands, no one has even heard the name of the sutra, Flower of the Truth, right? Fa Hua Ji. Much less gotten the chance to accept it and uphold it and read it and recite it. This, to me, this is the second big trigger, that people haven't even heard of the sutra. So this also is considered pitiable, a shame that people haven't even heard the name. And of course, I think there's much more than what's within the name, even though, Nichiren has a mantra of just reciting the name of the Lotus Sutra. Of course, there's much more to it than that. But here we see a real understanding of the dearth of the teaching in the world, that no one has even heard the name of the Flower of Truth. And one interesting thing, it's in chapter 5, when the Buddha calls us Huaren, flowering people, or is it Renhua, people flowers. You can make an argument for both. That we flourish, we bloom, we blossom in studying the Dharma, and that is really what the vow is about. And so that concludes the fourth Sukha Vihara. And once again, the two triggers are the people have lost an opportunity, and second, they can't even hear it, and also that the sutra is protected by the spiritual powers of the enlightened ones of the past, present, and future. This is hard for us to see, I think, and I remember Master Sheng Yen once addressing us, and it was really quite a moving thing. He said, you can't see the Buddha. Most of us can't see the Buddha. And he said, you can't see the Dharma. We can see sutras, but we can't see the true Dharma. He said, the only thing you could see is the Sangha. And he sort of, raised his arms to show that, he was a real representation and an emblem of the Dharma. So this is one of the things that's very important in understanding the faith, that we need to understand this. And as I said earlier in quoting David Chappelle, that we don't want to try to reduce the world to what we can understand. And certainly not the sutra. Much, much wider than our understanding. And all of these Sukha Viharas are all signposts which are giving us cues and how we might proceed in our practice. Okay, so now we get to the parable that is in this chapter. Very interesting parable. And let's see. I'm just going to go over very quickly the parables that have been in the sutra, just as a little bit of a primer, very quickly. I think that the first parable, this is not the way most people count it, is when the Buddha illuminated 18,000 realms in the first chapter. That is that is an expedient means, that is a symbol or portrayal beyond our understanding. And then the second is simply the chapter on expedient means, when the Buddha is explaining how he can't explain the sutra. That he can't explain it in the way that he understands it. When he says, even if 100,000 Sariputras were stood, from on their heads, they wouldn't have the wisdom to understand it. Then there's the burning house parable, where the Buddha likens the Saha world where we live as a burning house, and his children, us, in the house, who are practitioners in the three vehicles of the Shravakas, the Pratyeka Buddhas, and the Bodhisattvas. They don't realize that they're in a burning house. So he uses these expedient means in the form of a promise, which turns out to be false and true. The promise is of a great cart drawn by a great ox, which, actually he promised them the carts according to their vehicles, a goat and a deer and a small ox cart. But he's not giving them that. He's giving them something much greater. But he couldn't have portrayed it to them in that way. So they all come out and they're all saved. But in that particular parable, there's everyone is pretty passive, if you will. The idea that they are practicing different things doesn't seem to matter very much. So then we turn to the next parable, which is of the Prodigal Son. This is told from an entirely different point of view, which is where the four great bodhisattvas, who have now understood the meaning of the great vehicle, they're using this metaphor to explain how they understand that they had a birthright of Buddhahood, but they ignored it. And that is of the prodigal son, who was the child of the Buddha but wandered off. And it took a great deal of very gentle teaching on the Buddha's part before the son actually came into his inheritance of the Dharma. Then there is the parable in the 5th chapter of the plants that represent all the different ways that the Dharma can be received. This is, of course, a parable that doesn't have people. It's just a metaphor, although the Buddha does talk about different kinds of practitioners in that chapter. And in the Sanskrit part of the chapter, there's also another parable about how those of the lesser vehicle are like someone who's born blind, and when that's an ordinary person is someone born blind. When they practice the lesser vehicle, they acquire eyesight, but in studying the Mahayana, their powers are they understand they have powers much greater than eyesight, true wisdom. And then there is the parable of the conjured city. That's where the Buddha is encouraging the practitioners who think they've made it, the ones who have become arhats, who think they have done everything they had to do and their job is finished. Au contraire, says the Buddha, but he can't express that to them at first, so he conjures up the city of Nirvana, which turns out to be an illusion, because there was further to go. And as I mentioned last time when I was speaking about chapter 13, what they got that they never had before was the ability to help other sentient beings. What they got was compassion. What they got was an understanding of not only their own emptiness, but of the emptiness of the world around them. And then the next parable is about the jewel in the robe, which is very similar in a way of a person who was protected seemingly by the Buddha, who had I guess he was in fine straits when he began. He had a fine robe on, and his friend, who's the Buddha, sewed a jewel into his robe. And then this individual fell on hard times and finally encounters the rich person, aka the Buddha, later on, who says, you had this jewel in your robe all the time, which would have given you everything you could have possibly wanted. What's the matter with you? Once again, showing that this birthright is really with us at all times. So now we get to this jewel in the top knot. So in order to explain this, the Buddha starts to build a metaphor with a martial, right? A kind of a metaphor of combat, which is often used throughout the Dharma. You know, the Buddha said in the Dhammapada that the one who conquers himself is greater than the one who conquers 100,000 warriors in battle. So now he's talking about a wheel-turning king who wants to use his might to subdue other countries. Petty rulers will not heed his commands. So he calls up his generals to attack. And so these kings, these great generals go out, and the king sees his fighting forces. And when he sees that they have achieved distinction, he's delighted. And he gives them all manner of boons, of rewards and recompense for their bravery and for what they have conquered. He gives them towns and villages and cities and precious treasures and elephants and slaves and serfs. But he doesn't give away the pearl, the great pearl in his top knot, which I don't have. I don't have a pearl or a top knot. And it said in this sutra, it said this pearl is only supposed to be on the head of a king. And then the Buddha is then going to show that wheel-turning king is really him, and these great generals are the bodhisattvas, and the pearl is the Lotus Sutra. But first I want to explain this because I think it's a little strange, a little hard to understand exactly what the nature of this pearl in his top knot is. So I have a theory, this is the way that I look at it, is it says that the king, now I'm talking about the Chakravartin, the king who has this pearl, he can't give this away because it would upset his retainers. And that seems like a somewhat strange statement. I mean, why would they be upset? So possibly they would see the king relinquishing the symbol of his authority. Maybe that would be somewhat upsetting to them. But I think that this is more that when he talks about these retainers and the people in his kingdom being shocked and alarmed by his giving away the jewel, I think this is really a metaphoric understanding of the Shravakas, the people to whom this sutra is addressed in many ways, the people who are still attached to their earlier practices, because they see things the way they want to see things. They like the teachings the way the teachings have been. So that could be understood as the top knot. They don't want this top knot going anywhere. The teachings are the way they are supposed to be. So in the Buddha saying that everything that you have understood, all of your practices, they were okay, but they're ultimately wrong. They're not bringing you to the end result. That's very upsetting. So that's one thing. And maybe there's also some symbolism in giving the great pearl away. And it's almost as if the Buddha is transferring his crown. And as I mentioned this just a while ago about the Buddha says that he wants to make sentient beings like himself. And Master Sheng Yen used to say that the Buddha doesn't look at us and see us as any different from him. And so I thought there might be something of that in this transference of the jewel in the top knot. So just to go to this section in the sutra, the Buddha says the Tathagata is like this. He's like this Chakravartin. He uses the power of meditation and wisdom to win Dharma lands and becomes king of the threefold world. In Cleary's translation, it's he talks about it's the ones who arrive at reality. And so, many translations for the demons of delusion, the devil kings, Mara's minions, all of those won't submit. So this is us holding on. This makes me think of from Shantideva, says the kleshas, right? These all the hindrances. He says they have no hands or legs. How can they have so much power over me? So the demons of delusions and the devil kings and Mars minions, they don't surrender easily. But when the worthy sage and military leaders are successful, the Buddha is delighted in his heart and preaches various sutras in the midst of the Fourfold Assembly. Remember, monks, nuns, lay men, lay women, and he causes their hearts to rejoice. He confers special Dharma gifts, dhyana meditation, flawless roots and powers of undefiled faculties, with wealth and teaching. He bestows the city of nirvana and tells them they've attained extinction, guiding them to rejoice. But he holds back the Lotus Sutra. So now the wheel-turning king, when he sees someone among his soldiers who truly gained distinction, he's so delighted that he takes the great jewel that had been in his top knot for so long, which he would not recklessly give away. Clearly, the translator omitted the word recklessly, so it said he would not give it away, which is not true. He just wouldn't give it away foolishly. He wouldn't give it away needlessly. But now he gives it to the man. And the Tathagata does the same. As the great king of the threefold world, he transforms living beings. When he sees his wise and holy army fight the devils of the five skandhas, right? So that's the very makeup of sort of who we think we are, of body, sensation, perception, volition, and consciousness. It's kind of how we relate to the world. And the devils of affliction, which are the Fan Nao Moi and the Sumo, the devils of death. And when they win great distinction and merit, and they eliminate the three poisons, and they emerge from the threefold world, and they break Nara's nets, poor Mo Wang, then the Tathagata is greatly pleased. Though this sutra will be met with hostility and would be difficult for people to believe, this Dharma Flower Sutra can lead all living beings to comprehensive wisdom. Though it has never before been taught, now I teach it. One thing that I had sort of as a question in this is that in all of these other parables, the people who are receiving the teachings really had them but didn't know it, and it doesn't seem like they did so much to actually get the teachings. But in this particular parable, the Buddha is recognizing the merit of the bodhisattvas, the generals, perhaps of the arhat. So it's a slightly different nuance, which is worth further contemplation, I think. But so this is this is chapter 14. One thing to not get caught up, I think, in studying the Lotus Sutra is to think about the sequence of things. it's not like the Buddha is just proclaiming the sutra in chapter 14 that we're first hearing about. The sutra was proclaimed and delivered and completed in the first chapter, but in ways that we ordinary sentient beings can't understand. So this is all continuing in the mix. It's not before, it's not after, it's not at the same time. It's just the Lotus Sutra being taught, the mind itself being taught through the avenue of the Lotus Sutra. So the Buddha says, Manjushri, the Lotus Sutra, is foremost among all that is preached by the Tathagatas. Among all that is preached, it is the most profound, and it is given at the very last, the way that the powerful ruler gave away the bright jewel that he had guarded for so long. Manjushri, the Lotus Sutra, is the secret treasure of the Buddhas, supreme above all the others. Through the long night, I have guarded and protected it, and never recklessly propagated. But today, for the first time, I expound it for your sake. So, that really concludes chapter 14. Many other things to talk about. But I want to thank everyone for listening. And let me just give the concluding, before we do questions, I'll just do the concluding verses. May the virtuous merits adorn and purify the pure land of the Buddhas. Upwardly, we repay the 4 layers of gratitude. Downwardly, we alleviate the suffering of the 3 destinies. May those who see and hear the Dharma generate Bodhi mind. Exhausting the body of retribution, may we be reborn in the land of extreme bliss. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Harry. We actually already passed the time, so do you want to do Q&A? Maybe if Q&A, probably we can only take one question, or we can save it to next time.
All right. Well, there's a lot in that chapter. So sure, anybody who has a question. Echo.
Hi, Harry.
Hi.
Thank you for the talk. It's always so thrilled to listen to your talk, and I just wanted to also share what Sifu has said about this parable, the parable about this jewel.
Please. Yeah.
Sifu explained that this Lotus Sutra that is so profound and important, and the Buddha expounded Dharma right before he entered the parinirvana. So in other words, he waited till the last moment to share this most profound Lotus Sutra. So that is the parable. It is like, yes, I'm about to leave this world now. This is the most profound teaching now. I am ready to share with you. So that's what Sifu was explaining to this parable.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it is most profound. So, well, I'm in no rush, but I understand that time is limited. So, I mean, do we have any time for another question?
Maybe very simple question, I guess. Last one. We can always do it next time as well.
Yeah,
we will continue to give the talk next time,
okay.
right?
Well, I get so enthused. I'm happy to keep talking. So, all right. Well, I guess if we've run out of time, we always have time to study the sutra. So in the future. So thank you all for coming and for zooming in. And I will see you next week, where we will continue our Bodhisattva journey in chapter 15.